That's the thing I think that stops people the most, is that it's super expensive, and it really is. The other side of that is that all of the major airlines have some kind of program to help with that financial burden.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
What is going on, all my aviation friends out there? This is Jim here. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Fly the Transition, where we'll be exploring yet another story of career transformation. Happy to have you with me along for this new episode. This episode, we'll be talking with Jody Brant. He is currently an airline captain, but we'll talk about his journey from being a Navy corpsman, then moving into naval aviation, and finally a career with the airlines. So you may have seen on my social media, I posted that I celebrated the 10th anniversary of achieving my private pilot certificate. And it seems like it was not that long ago, but so long all at the same time. When I first obtained my private pilot certificate, it was all about, I just want to have some fun and check out some interesting places, maybe do some flying with Civil Air Patrol. And it has really blossomed into where I am today of now I'm working on my CFI rating. I'm hosting 2 different podcasts, and I've had so many incredible opportunities to meet and interact with all the awesome people that are in this aviation community. And as you meet and talk with those people in the community, you quickly find out that more often than not, the people in aviation are there for each other. It's a small, tight-knit community for as many pilots as there are out there. You can go into just about any FBO and strike up a conversation with another pilot. Or you get into a conversation talking about things like AirVenture or the cool air shows that are out there, and everyone talks about the community and the people that you meet there, and it is just so cool to be a part of that. So I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunities that I've had over the last 10 years, and I'm really excited to see not only podcasting-wise where things go, but as I complete my CFI, where I'm able to take that as well. So clearly still in my own transition phase, so to speak. Granted, it's a bit of a long burn considering the timing that I have to get this done. But as I said in the solo show, I'm going to be prepared if an opportunity ever presents itself when I get towards retirement. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it for tonight. Also want to say a big thank you again to everyone out there who's listening. For the last, 4 or 5 days, we have been sitting in the top 20 for aviation podcasts on Apple. So to me, that's a pretty humbling accomplishment to be in the likes of some pretty great podcasts that are out there in the aviation space. So that wouldn't be possible without the likes, shares, subscribes, listens of all of you out there. So appreciate you helping me get the word out there about this podcast, and let's just keep growing this thing. Let's keep sharing it. Let's keep encouraging and inspiring others and seeing who else can make the leap and come on and tell their story someday. So before we get into our interview with Jody, one quick message from the mailbag this week. This is a comment from Eva Grindley, who posted on our Instagram after the last episode. Eva says, "I love your podcast, and the new format for the second series is great. Thank you for taking the time to make them. I always appreciate the feedback, and thank you so much for that, Eva, and for listening." So what do you say we jump into this week's episode? We're going to be talking with Jody here for a bit about his career transformations and how he went from being a corpsman to a military aviator, and after a successful career in the military, moving off into the airline world. So without further ado, let's welcome Jody to the Fly the Transition podcast. Jody, thanks so much for joining me on Fly the Transition. Appreciate you being with us and sharing your story.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to maybe motivate somebody to try this as a first or second career. It doesn't really matter.
There we go. That's what it's all about. So talk to me about maybe your first exposures of aviation. Were you like surrounded by it growing up, or is it something that wasn't really available? Tell me about that.
So it wasn't. I guess part of the reason that it became a second career for me was that, I grew up child of the 80s. So Top Gun was a huge movie that we all watched and thought was super cool. And flying airplanes should have been sort of forward of mind for me, but it just really wasn't. I didn't have, a lot of my buddies that fly, their dad flew or they had a neighbor growing up, and it was something I just never had that. I went to air shows with my parents from time to time, and I thought airplanes were neat, but I couldn't make the mental leap of putting myself into that position. I could do that, and so it wasn't so much really an option for me, unfortunately, just because I never saw it as one.
Yeah.
It took somebody to kind of sit me down and be like, hey, this is a thing that you can do, before I could have any kind of real vision of that.
Yeah, I think that's not too uncommon of a theme for folks that aren't like exposed with a family member that's in aviation or something like that, that it's just, you don't know the steps you need to take to get there. It just seems like this unattainable dream.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is somewhat of a legacy business. A lot of the people that I flew with in the military, and also that I fly with now, I work for American Airlines, and a lot of those guys and gals had some kind of mentor, whether it was a family member or even just at some point they were exposed to a pilot that they knew personally, a neighbor, somebody that they could look. And when you see somebody and interact with them that way, I feel like it makes it more real, something that I can envision myself doing this. And you get information, right? How did you become a pilot? And sort of what we're doing here on a more personal level. I feel like that's kind of important for the being able to put yourself in that seat.
Yeah. So with aviation not being at the forefront of career choices, what direction did you go with your career?
So as I said, I graduated from high school in 1992, and like a lot of young men, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I'm still struggling with that at times. My wife would attest. But so when I graduated from high school, I knew I didn't want to go to college. I felt like going to college would have been a waste of money at the time because I just wasn't that motivated about it. I graduated from high school and did pretty well, and I'm somewhere in the middle of the bell curve as far as being smart. So I knew I could go to college, but I knew I wasn't motivated to do that. And sometimes knowing that you're not willing to work that hard to do something is probably your biggest gift, and it was for me. And so I got a job as a waiter and was making pretty good money doing that, because as an 18-year-old waiting tables, you can make a pretty good living in Jacksonville, Florida. And so after a few months of doing that, I realized this is not a career. This is not what I want to do. I worked at a restaurant with some folks in their 40s and 50s that were still doing that. I was like, well, that's not really where I want to go. And so I happened to literally stumble into a Navy recruiting office and started talking to the recruiter. And, they have all kinds of good deals for you. And so their good deal. Good deal for me was they would send me to boot camp and teach me a trade. And I liked the idea. Both of my grandfathers served in the Navy during World War II, and so I saw pictures of them in their uniforms as a kid. So I signed up sort of on a whim to the Navy and became a medic. In the Navy, they're called hospital corpsmen. And I knew that I wanted to learn a skill, and this gave me the opportunity to go to like EMT school and possibly paramedic school and some other things to build what was going to be the career. And so I did that. You go to school. It's about 4 or 5 months of schooling, and then they send you to a hospital to work for a little while, and then they send you to some kind of deployable job. And my job was the Marine Corps doesn't have medics. They use Navy medics. And so you go to another school for a few weeks and learn how to not get everybody shot in the field. And then you go and serve with the Marine Corps Infantry Battalion. And that's what I did. I did that for almost 3 years.
You talk about how you get done with school and now you're getting to this point where you can go to like a deployable assignment. So how is it they decide that you'll be attached with, say, a Marine Corps unit versus going to a Navy ship?
For the Navy, we have what are called detailers, and they're basically the people who work at the Bureau of Personnel for the Navy, and they're sort of in charge of building the house of cards of where everybody's coming from and where they're going to, and what units are short of people and what units have too many people. And so, at the time when we got out of hospital corps school, you had to go to a shore duty station. Because you basically come out, it's sort of like you come out with certain qualifications, but you're not ready to go and work in a deployed status where you can, they want you to work in a more controlled environment. So they send you to a hospital. And so we did that for 18 months. Well, at the end of that, you talk to the detailer and you say, hey, these are the things I'd like to do.
Okay.
And depending on who you talk to, sometimes they take that and they ball it up in a little ball and throw it in the trash. And then they look at what they need you to do.
Yeah.
And I was, I was a 20-year-old, reasonably fit human. And that's who the Marines want to be with them. Because one thing I found with the Marines is they love their corpsmen. They take good care of you if you take good care of them. And if you can't go on runs with them, if you can't carry weight with them, if you can't go on, if you can't go on a 16-mile hump with them, you're no use to them because you're not with them to help them. Some of it had to do with that like I said, I was in reasonably good shape. Part of it was, as I said before, I was married at that point. My wife was still in the Navy. Well, when you're married to another service member, they have what's called spousal co-location orders you can request so that I don't get stationed in San Diego while she's in Virginia. You know what I mean? And so we requested that. Well, Camp Lejeune has a huge naval hospital. So she got assigned to the naval hospital while I got assigned to the division at Camp Lejeune. So it was a way to keep us co-located. So like I said, that house of cards that the detailers build, we were able to put our cards together and keep us in the same place. So even though I was deploying, she would be able to go home every night and be with the kids because I was not.
Sure.
Here's the irony of it. I'm from St. Augustine, Florida, which is just south of Jacksonville. So you've got obviously huge naval base in Jacksonville, huge air base.
Oh, sure.
I asked the detailer for anything in Jacksonville, Florida. I'll take whatever. I'll take a ship. I'll take a squadron. I'll take whatever you got. And they sent me to Jacksonville, North Carolina to Camp Lejeune.
When I filled out, they call it a dream sheet in the Air Force because I think that's exactly what it is. It's a dream if you think you're going to any of those places. But I put nothing but Midwest bases that I had no idea when I was filling it out. They are terrible bases in the winter. And they stationed me in Las Vegas. So...
I mean, I get it. They've got a very difficult job.
Oh, yeah.
It can't be easy, and everybody's not going to be happy. And I was still fairly junior. That obviously plays into it. The only specialty I had, so you go to your main tech school, essentially, and I was a medic. And I had gone to EMT school, and I'd gone to some other qualification classes, but the only other Navy qualification I had it's called 8404. It's the field medical service school. Okay. And so that's what I said, the school they send us to go so you can go and play with the Marines. That was the only other qualification I had. So if I'd been an aviation physiology tech or something, maybe getting to a squadron would have been easier. But I got to do a lot of neat stuff with the Marines. As a medic, as I said, if you can keep up with them, you work out with them and you play with them, when they're out, cleaning weapons, I was out cleaning weapons. When they were, when we go on, what they call them humps, they're forced marches. Yeah. And you've got all your medical gear plus all your regular gear. Well, I was with a heavy weapons platoon, so they were carrying 50 cals and mortar tubes and all kinds of stuff. And I would take my turn carrying those because I was one of them. And they, if you do that kind of stuff, they take really good care of you. So anytime there was a live fire event where they were going out and shooting up ammunition, they'd take me, and I got to shoot 50 cals, and I got to shoot Mark 19s, and I got to shoot every crew served or personal weapon that the Marine Corps had at the time. So it was a lot of fun. It was very satisfying. I got to help people. The Marines hurt themselves in new and exciting ways every day.
Yeah.
Monday morning sick call was always exciting. I've said for years that I was going to write a book, and the title was going to be Monday Morning Sick Call, and the subtitle was going to be we were sitting around the barracks drinking beer, because that's how all the good stories start. How did this happen to you, man? Well, we were sitting around the barracks drinking beer. Say no more. I got it.
Sadly, there could be but one outcome after that.
Yeah, I mean, like at that point, somebody's going to end up in sick call Monday morning.
Right.
Never a dull moment.
So as you advanced through the ranks in the Navy, how was it that you decided that you're going to go to the officer side? I know that a lot of people in the military kind of go back and forth, especially if you're working on a degree program. Am I going to stay enlisted? Am I going to go officer? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, so getting the degree honestly meant very little to me. It was just a step. It was a gate I had to get through to get my commission. I was married. So after I'd been enlisted for 4 years, I was married. My son had been born, and my wife was pregnant with our daughter. And so it was one of those things where she wanted to get out. Her time was up as well, and she wanted to get out. She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And so the quickest way, rather than at the time I had just been selected for E5, which is second class petty officer for us, and that's not enough money to raise a family on. The quickest way for advancement, especially as a hospital corpsman, the advancement was very slow at that time for that particular rate. And so the quickest way to do that was to get commissioned.
Okay.
And my plan being at the time, get commissioned, go to medical school, and then come back to Camp Lejeune as a division surgeon. Sort of the supervisory position of all the guys that were doing what I did. And that was the plan. And I went to college. The Navy gave me a scholarship. I went to college, and at the end of college, I got accepted to medical school and went back to the Navy and said, "Hey, look at this." And the Navy said, "Well, we've already paid for your undergrad. We're not interested in paying for medical school." So you really have three choices. You can drive airplanes, you can drive ships, you can drive submarines, and that's choose your poison. And my plan actually was to drive ships. The commitment at the time for surface warfare, which is what we call ship drivers, surface warfare officer, was about 2 years. So I could go to school for that. You go to, your training, you go drive ships for 2 years, and then I could reapply to medical school. And at that point, I would have paid off my commitment, and they would probably, if you get accepted to medical school, they probably will pay for it. And, but with aviation, obviously it's a much longer training. The training for aviation is almost 2 years. And then on top of that, you have to serve anywhere from 6 to 10 years. It depends on what timeline it is.
Sure.
So my plan was to go to surface warfare school and go back to medical school. And the CO of my ROTC detachment in college sat me down and he said, "Look, Jody, I know what you're trying to get done. I see it. I understand it. But you need to understand that driving ships is terrible and you'll hate it." And I was like, well, he was a pilot. So I was like, well, that's, I get it. Yeah, that's what you have to say to everybody. He said, no, really. And every summer you go for training for 6 weeks. And he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you for 3 weeks to an aviation squadron. I'm going to send you for 3 weeks to a ship. And you come back and you tell me what you want to do. And that's what you'll do. Because I had good grades in college. By the time I got to college, I was 24 years old. I was much more motivated to do well. I had a wife and kids, relying on me. And I actually worked my way through college as a waiter. So the waiting job that experience came back to help. So I went and did 3 weeks of training on a ship. Well, actually, he's a smart guy. He sent me to the aviation squadron first. And I went to the squadron. And it was neat. You get to wear a flight suit, man. There's pockets everywhere. It's like wearing pajamas to work. And I did that for 3 weeks, and I liked it. I liked it just fine. But again, the commitment was so much longer. So then I got to the ship, and he sent me to a pretty cool ship. It was based out of Japan, so I got to go to Japan for 3 weeks. Spent all of it out on the ship. And I got to the ship and realized in about 8 milliseconds that this was not the life for me. I was immediately just everything about being on the ship did not agree with me. And so I came back and I told him, yeah, I'd like to try and, go the aviation route. And fortunately, I already had a flight physical. So I knew that I had good enough eyes to do it. I knew that I didn't have some weird, and this happened. So the Navy has all these, they have a place called the Naval Aviation Medical Institute, NAMI.
Sure.
And those guys sort of set the rules. Like, you have to be this tall, but not this tall. And when you're sitting down, you have to be this tall and be able to reach this far. And we had people who got aviation contracts. And when you start flight school, one of the first things they do is they send you to NAMI and they sit you down and measure all those things to make sure you didn't fudge it a little bit. And we had people who got caught up in that and ended up not being able to fly because of that. And so I kind of already knew that stuff, and I knew that I was kind of in the middle of all the bell curves for that. And so it worked out for me.
Okay.
And started flight school, actually started the ground school portion of flight school right before September 11th. September 11th happened while I was in ground school. And
oh, wow.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was this huge paradigm shift from the Bill Clinton 90s peace dividend military to, and it's one of those moments that when September 11th happens, all of us, they called us all into the schoolhouse to sit and watch what was going on and start talking about it. And immediately all of us knew, this has changed our entire lives.
Yep.
We're I remember a friend of mine sitting right in front of me in the theater and turned around and said, we're going to war. This is it. Now, none of us had any idea that this was going to be, our entire lives. I started flight school at September 11th. I retired in 2017, and we were still fighting in Afghanistan when I retired.
Right. So, interestingly enough, I also was in the military on September 11th, and we had very similar experience in that regard of going, this is huge. We're going to war.
We all kind of felt like this is a huge paradigm shift.
Yeah.
This is not, this is for our parents' generation. You had JFK.
Yep.
For their parents' generation, you had Pearl Harbor. This was a little more Pearl Harbor than JFK because it was that clearly we were attacked by somebody, and we were going to have to respond. I think we all knew that it was going to change the trajectory of our careers. We had no idea how much. And I think from talking to my buddies on the civilian side of aviation at the time, they knew that same thing. And, obviously you had with the commercial airlines after September 11th, you had furloughs and you had a lot of stagnation in people's careers and things that happened. It's a bellwether moment in our careers, no matter what you were doing at the time.
Yeah. So with your time as a combat medic, what kind of transferable skills were there that were able to really benefit you in the aviation side once you made that move?
I think the biggest thing was and I don't want to call it maturity because I definitely don't have that. In fact, I think most pilots are bereft of it. But I do think that I had been placed into real life and death situations, and almost always you have time to take a breath, think about what your next move is, because the wrong move right now is much more harmful than the right move in about 3 seconds. And really generally 3 seconds is all it takes for your mind to get through the panic mode. In aviation, you talk about the startle effect.
Yeah.
Well, startle effect, 3 to 5 seconds. If you can learn that in 3 to 5 seconds, if you just stop, don't do anything, and then start to process what's going on, for the most part, you'll come up with a better solution. That is true in emergency medicine. It is also true in aviation. And I think that's the biggest transferable skill. Aviation, especially when I was flying little single engine trainers, there weren't a lot of lives at stake. It was me and one other guy. And it was either, when I was a student, it was me and an instructor. When I was an instructor, it was me and a student. And as long as you understand that, yes, it's a life and death thing, but there's very little that can happen in an airplane that is going to make you fall out of the sky, uncontrollably. I think taking that deep breath and then being able to process the information, that's the biggest transferable skill I think I got. I spent a few years instructing in the Navy, and one of the things I always used to tell students is no fast hands in the cockpit, or no cockpit kung fu, we used to say. Okay. If something goes wrong, a light comes on, take a deep breath, look at the light, acknowledge it. If you've studied, you know what that light means, and you know what you're supposed to do, but you've got a second to take a breath before you have to do anything. Yeah. And I think, really, in every aviation situation I've been in every airplane I've flown, in every capacity I've flown them, that's been the case. That doing the wrong thing immediately is a lot more harmful than doing nothing for about 3 seconds.
So let's move into your military aviation career. So I assume you get a pilot slot, otherwise we probably wouldn't be here.
Yeah. This would be the least useful podcast in history if I didn't. So yes, I was very fortunate. I got into the Navy at the time, was very short on pilots. The airlines were hiring like crazy. So I graduated from college in December of 99. I started flight school in April of 2000. And so the Navy, airlines were going like crazy, and they were hiring up a bunch of pilots, and I wanted to be a pilot, and the Navy needed me a lot. And so I got a aviation slot. I got selected for pilot. So in the Navy, you've got pilots, and you've got not naval flight officers, NFOs. Okay. Those are radar operators and navigators and things like that. They're aviation, but they're not pilots. I was able to get a pilot slot, which is what I wanted to do, and started flight school. And it was very interesting. I loved the idea of flying, but I'd never done it. Like I said, I didn't have anybody in my life that was a pilot. I'd probably been on an airplane 6-7 times. I'd been in fact, I can assure you that I had done more flights in helicopters with the Marines than I had done in any fixed wing aircraft at the time. And that includes like commercial aviation. We didn't travel a lot when I was a kid, so I didn't fly on airplanes. I think my first flight was probably I was 16 or 17 years old. I went somewhere for spring break with some friends. And so I started flight school really knowing nothing about the operation of airplanes, and the Navy is very good. They kind of expect that, or they I guess they plan for that. Okay. And so you go your initial flight school is 6 weeks of, at the time they called it Aviation Pre-Flight Indoctrination, API, and you do aerodynamics and how jet engines work and survival school and all these other things before you ever touch an airplane. But it's all the theoretical stuff, weather and all of that. And you go through that. It's 6 weeks long, and I did reasonably well at that. It was very straightforward. Of, here's the book. Read the book. We're going to test you on the book, and if you pass that test, we'll give you another book. Okay. And so that's what we did for 6 weeks. Essentially once a week you got a new book, and so we get done with that, and then you go to your squadron where you're going to fly an airplane for the first time. And you go through ground school for that airplane, which is similar to what the aviation pre-flight indoctrination. They give you a book about the airplane, they ask you about the engine, and they're going to test you on that, and you take a test and you pass. And then they're going to ask you about the landing gear and take a test on that. And so you go through systems class and take a test, and then you pass that and you're good. And then they give you a procedures test, and you get past that and you're good. And then you finally get to get in an airplane. So I think I started flight school. I believe it was either April or May of 2000. It wasn't until November of 2001 that I finally get in an airplane.
Wow.
So I get in an airplane for the first time, and it's just like any military evolution, that you go, you show up on time, you meet your instructor, there's a brief, the instructor asks you questions, you answer the questions, and then you go get in the airplane and you go fly. And as I said, I'd done pretty well so far, and I showed up to that first brief, and I could not get a single coherent sentence out of my mouth.
Oh, no.
And it was terrible. It was 2 hours of this, the flight instructor just berating me, and some of it deservedly so. I just couldn't make the answers come out of my face. But he's like, all right, no, and normally we wouldn't even go flying, but here we're going to go because I want to fly today. And so we go out and we get in the airplane. It's a T-34 Turbo Mentor,
Okay.
which is it's a small single engine, really fun airplane to fly. It's a sliding canopy, looks like a little smaller version of a P-51.
Okay.
That's the best way I can think of to describe it. It's a 4,400 pound airplane with a 550 horsepower turbine in it, and it scoots along.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet that'll go a little bit.
It's super fun. It's a completely aerobatic airplane. That's what you do all of your primary training in the Navy in.
Okay.
And so you get in that for the first time, and it's turbine, so it's a little bit of a process to get it started. Again, it's checklists, and the instructor's asking me questions and saying some terrible things about my parents at the time. And I finally get the engine started, and it's November in Florida, so it's still warm, no air conditioning until this engine is started, and he's yelling at me because he's sweating and he doesn't like that. So, and by the way, there's 50 airplanes on the flight line. Everybody's getting started and trying to get to the runway to get out to do their 2-hour flight.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in the plane. I'm in a Nomex flight suit. I'm in a helmet. I'm in all the survival gear that they strap onto you. I'm sweating like a pig. And I remember we start taxiing. I can't taxi worth a darn because it's my first day.
Yeah, right.
And he says to me, why are you so terrible at this? And I said to him, it's my first day. I don't know if we went over that. He didn't think that was at all funny. But
I mean, I do now, but
yeah, I mean, I think it's hilarious. If my students had said that to me, I probably would have yelled at them too. But
right.
But so we finally get out and we're taxiing, and the plane doesn't actually have nose wheel steering. It is just done with differential braking and rudder action with prop wash over the rudder. And so it's kind of a tough plane to learn to taxi, especially if it's your first day.
Well, it's first day.
And I'm terrible at it. And we get to the runway, but man, I've got all these kerosene fumes from all the jet fuel and all the airplanes running. And I am 1 millisecond from saying, you know what? I just can't do this. This is not for me. It's not what I thought it would be. I'm out. And we get onto the runway. We get cleared for takeoff. And he takes controls because he's got to line us up and he's going to do the first takeoff. So that's the only thing, honestly, I think the only thing that saved me from hitting the ICS, the intercommunication system, and saying, you know what, I'm out, I'm done, I can't do this, was he was taxiing. So he was done yelling at me for a few minutes.
Sure.
We get on the runway and he sets power. We get cleared for takeoff. He sets power. We start rolling down the runway. He calls 60 knots, 80 knots, rotate. We rotate. And immediately I'm no longer airsick. I see the earth just falling away from me. And I remember like it was yesterday. I remember thinking, this is what I want to do every day for the rest of my life.
That's awesome.
In a 20-second time span, I went from, you know what, I just can't do this, to this is what I want to do for every day for the rest of my life. And I flew an airplane. I flew a flight to Raleigh-Durham the other day, 2 days ago. And I did the takeoff. It was my turn to do the takeoff. I took off out of Miami and started that turn out to the north. And I thought, you know what? This is what I want to do every day for the rest of my life. So it's been, 22 years of doing it, and I have not gotten tired of it yet.
That's fantastic. I think it's really interesting that you had to get off the ground to figure out that you could really do this. All you needed to do was take flight.
Yeah, super easy. And I went through, during my time in the Navy. So you go, like I said, you do ground school, you do your first airplane. Everybody flies fixed wing in the Navy, whether you're flying helicopters or whether you're flying jets or P3s or now P8s. Whatever you're going to fly, you fly T-34 first, now at T6. That's the new single engine trainer. And then you go to your specialty. So if you're going to helos, you go and fly a helicopter. If you're going to maritime, you go fly, it's a King Air 90. If you're going to jets, you go fly a T-45. But everybody flies that T-34 first. And it's a fun airplane to fly. That, like I said, the new one's the T6. It is also quite fun. It's twice the horsepower and not quite twice the weight. But it's an injection seat aircraft, fully pressurized. It's a little more formal, is I guess the best way to put it.
Okay.
The T-34 was unpressurized. You kind of climbed in it. You felt like you were getting into a World War II fighter. You had a sliding canopy. So as an instructor, you'd be sitting back there, and in the T-34, if it got really hot, you just tell the student, hey, keep your straight and level, and you just pop the canopy open, let the air come in, because the air conditioner was terrible in it. So I mean, that's kind of how I made the transition. Is I wasn't 100% sure that it was something that I certainly wasn't sure I was gonna be good at it. I wasn't sure it was something I was gonna stick with permanently. But man, as soon as we did that first takeoff, I knew that any thought of medical school was gone. Like I was hooked, and I still am.
It's all it takes.
Yeah. Yep.
So as you're going through your flight training, do you have an idea? I'm assuming that the Navy works maybe similar to the Air Force, where the aircraft assignment you get is probably largely based on performance. Is that true in the Navy too?
It is. So in the Navy, they give you what's called a Navy Standard Score. It's based on a bell curve of the last 200 people that have gone through flight school, and there's some kind of crazy wicked formula. I'm sure that there's a guy who knows how that formula works. I'm not that guy. But essentially you fly it's called primary training. So in the T-34, you do contact training, which is just VFR training, a lot of pattern work and emergencies. So, we call them precautionary emergency landings, not actual engine shutdown, but simulated engine shutdown landings, all that kind of stuff. Then you go and you do aerobatics, which again, you've got 12 flights. They send you out on a solo. You come back, you do 2 more flights, and they send you out on a PA solo. So you can go out and do loops and barrel rolls and stuff in this, airplane that you've flown 14 times. It's awesome. It's a fantastic program. And then you do formation, you do instrument flying. At the end of all of that, they give you this Navy Standard Score, and it's anywhere from, really, really, most people are in from 30 to 60 is the score. So when you get your score, 50 is the median. And if you have above 50, you're eligible to fly jets. If you're below 50, you're going to fly something else. And I was right at 50. I was pretty much average, and wanted, like I said before, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. So I was like, well, I'll pick P3s, and then I can be stationed near home, near my family and stuff. That would be great. And I picked P3s and got stationed in the furthest P3 base on the planet from my house.
Of course you did.
Now that base was Hawaii, so it wasn't terrible.
So I shouldn't feel too bad for you, is what you're saying.
No, I of all the, we talked a little about detailers and how they just sort of throw you wherever they would like to throw you. I was very fortunate that the places that they threw me ended up being pretty nice. I lived in Hawaii for 3 years. We lived in Pensacola for a few years. Okay. I did have to do one stint on a ship but that was it was in Norfolk, Virginia, and it was the Enterprise, which was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. So it was historic, very neat. And then my wife and I, my family and I lived in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for a couple of years. That was my last duty station in the Navy.
Interesting.
It was an interesting place.
We'll hear more from Jody in just a moment, but before we do that, a quick word from those who make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Aviation friends, are you looking for eyewear that's as adventurous as you are? Look no further than Flying Eyes Optics. Their ultralight, comfortable, and durable glasses and sunglasses are perfect for pilots. They are designed by pilots, for pilots, and for my money, they're the best aviation eyewear that I have ever had. If you or that special pilot in your life are interested in Flying Eyes, check out our affiliate link down in the show notes and use code FlyingMidwest10 and you can get 10% off your next purchase at Flying Eyes. Aviation enthusiasts, have you heard about my friends over at Pilot Quarters? This pilot-owned family business is crafting your next favorite flying shirt. Their chart-inspired merchandise comes in camp shirts, polo shirts, and more. And by popular demand, they're adding lightweight fleece hoodies and long-sleeve tees to their collection. So head on over to pilotquarters.com today and soar in style.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
At some point, you retire from the Navy, and what are you going to do? What are your plans at that point?
So in 2017, I retired from the Navy, and I wasn't really sure. I wasn't sure. In fact, I was pretty sure I didn't want to fly passengers around.
Okay.
And it was actually my stint in Guantanamo Bay that changed my mind. In Guantanamo Bay, I was stationed there, and we had a couple of King Airs that we flew. We used them. They were called base support aircraft, and basically flew them back and forth from Miami and Jacksonville, Florida, to Guantanamo Bay, and we moved people and we moved stuff, and we just used them when we couldn't, when we didn't need a C-130 or a C-17 to bring a bunch of stuff. Maybe we just, like one of the runs we used to do, this is one of the more fun ones, you have to have American US dollars on the base in Guantanamo Bay for people to buy stuff and sell stuff. That money has to go and come somehow. And so we would every 3 months or so, we would fly to Jacksonville and pick up like $2.3 million in these bricks of cellophane, like drug dealers, and take them back to the base. And that was the base's, it wasn't operating funds for the base, but it was like all of the monopoly money that we used at the McDonald's and at the exchange and at the, wherever you spent money on the base. And so in doing some of that, we moved people around. And the King Airs that we had were configured for 7 passengers, and most of our lifts were 1 or 2 people. And so we would open up the plane and basically tell people, hey, if you would like to fly with us, as long as you're qualified, you didn't have to be qualified to fly, but as long as you're authorized to fly on the normal rotating 737 that comes in and out of Guantanamo, you can fly with us as well.
Okay.
And so we would put passengers on, essentially. And we got to take people that, because we ran much more often than just the regular rotating 737, when somebody's grandfather was in the hospital or somebody's mom was in a car accident, we were generally able to get them back to the States faster.
Sure.
And so getting people where they wanted to go was never something that I thought I wanted to do until I started doing it. And I became very enamored with it. And that sort of changed my mind of maybe going and flying cargo or doing something else to, oh no, flying people around is actually something I think I would enjoy. And so that sort of changed my mind. And then when I retired in 2017, it was just before the big uptick in hiring for the major airlines. And so I thought about going and flying for a regional airline to build some hours and try to make a better resume. But I also promised myself when I retired from the Navy, I wasn't going to shave for a year. And so that was, those two things were not compatible. And I had a buddy who was working for a contract company flying King Airs in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so I got a job doing that. And I did that for 2 years. And it was a good job. I liked it. It paid much better than the regionals were paying at the time. And I kind of got to ease my way into retirement in that I was still doing some of the same work.
Right.
I was still supporting the warfighter, and that was something that was important to me. And then it came down to I was with those contract jobs. I was gone for 3 months. I was home for a couple of months. I was gone for 4 or 5 months. My wife got tired of that. She said, you've retired from the Navy. It's time to get an adult job. And I said, well, I can become an airline pilot. That's the best I can do.
Yeah.
And so I did. I started putting out applications, and that process was very, very, I don't want to say it was very difficult, but it was certainly a change for me. Putting together a formal resume, I had to go and get a suit. I'd never worn a suit because it was always a uniform, Right. And so doing that kind of stuff, I actually used a resume service and a interview prep service because, you go into an interview with a civilian company, and even the airlines, which are obviously, there's a lot of military aviators. There's
Sure.
there's a lot of overlap there in that Venn diagram. There's still you want to present yourself as an airline pilot, not as a military pilot. And so I did interview prep for that, and got an interview with American Airlines pretty early on in the process, and knew that I knew that I was leaning that way, and got the job offer from them almost immediately. And so I started with them in January of 2019, and I've been with them, through COVID and all of that since then.
So you mentioned something that I wanted to explore a little further. You talked about using like a resume and interview prep service. So is that something that they cater more towards helping people that are coming out of the military, or is it just a general service that people can go look for to help them get ready for the airlines?
So the one that I did focuses on military aviation. I know that there are others out there that do just interview prep. And it's American Airlines, the interview process was, I don't want to say it was informal because that's not the right word, but it seemed very low threat.
Okay.
From talking to my friends who have interviewed with other airlines, Delta and Southwest in particular, it's a much more structured process. American Airlines, I very much felt like they were more interested. Look, if we've invited you to interview, we already believe that you can fly the airplanes for us.
Okay.
What we want to do is make sure that you're a person that we want to go on a 4-day trip with.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not going to be at each other's throats. So I feel like, obviously there were questions in the interview about, hey, tell me about a time when this happened, or hey, you're a 737 and you're going to fly from Miami to, Nassau, Bahamas. What are you thinking about? This goes on. Or hey, the captain, you're flying on cruise and the captain looks over at you and says, I don't feel that well. And then he becomes unresponsive. All of those questions were at the American Airlines interview, but I felt like they were interested in the answer, but they were also interested in how you thought through the process and
Sure.
and how you presented the answer as much as anything else.
So the process itself, how long did that take from the time that you put in your application to getting your conditional job offer?
Well, so I put in my application pretty early after I retired from the Navy. So I retired in July of 2017. And so I started filling out applications right away, knowing that I didn't want to go work for a major airline right away, but that I wanted, you want that application process going And if the opportunity presents itself, then you go. Especially at the time, the airlines weren't hiring a whole lot of people.
Sure.
So I put in my applications pretty soon after I retired. So July of 17, I got invited for an interview in, I believe it was either September or October of 19.
Okay.
But I didn't do a whole lot with my application in the interim. I would go in and update it every couple of months because I was, like I said, I was going and flying for a couple of months and I was coming home and not flying for a couple of months.
Okay.
When I wasn't flying, I wasn't doing anything with my application. And one of my buddies who worked at American Airlines was like, listen, if this is what you want to do, they want to see that you're updating your application. They want to see that you're into this.
Yeah.
And so he said, just go in there every couple of weeks and update your applications, update your hours, fool around with it. Because they can see that you're logged in. They can see that you're doing stuff, that you're keeping this application up. You do want to come work for them. And sure enough, I started doing that. And within 6 weeks, I had been invited for an interview.
So once you get through the interview, how long did it take to get your offer and then start the training?
So it was really funny. I interviewed like December 7th and 8th. It's a 2-day process. And I got on a plane in Dallas to come home after the interview on the 8th. And I felt pretty good about it. Everybody I'd interviewed with, because you interview with 2 pilots, you interview with a human resources person.
Yeah.
But everybody I had interviewed with said, hey, we're really excited to talk to you. And nobody would say how you did, but it's nice talking to you. They were all very supportive. So I got on a plane to come back. It's about a 2.5-hour flight from Dallas to Jacksonville. When I landed in Jacksonville, I had a voicemail that I'd gotten the job.
Oh, awesome.
So the CJO happened within a couple of hours. Some of that has sped up for some people. It has also slowed down for some people now.
Okay.
I hear that people are interviewing and then they have a couple of weeks with a review board. Some of that has to do with after the Atlas accident in Galveston, Texas, the PIRA requests, making sure that all your records are exactly correct.
Okay. Yeah.
That process can sometimes take a little longer now than it used to, which is a good thing, but it puts people on the hook for up to 2 weeks or so to get that CJO.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what I would say is, for me, it was very fast. That's not always the case, and it's not always bad news if it's not.
So over the last handful of years, obviously there's all this talk of the pilot shortage. Have you noticed an impact to that?
I have. I think that the biggest thing that you notice is, the typical career path used to be, for a military guy getting out, you go to a regional, get some 121 time, maybe get a little more pilot and command time or multi-engine time, depending on what your airframe was in the military. And for a civilian, it was build hours, get your ATP, go to a regional, then build some hours. That building hours thing, that kill chain is getting much, much shorter now. You've got a lot of folks showing up at American Airlines, Delta, all of the major airlines with a lot shorter career path to get there. And now I'm a relatively junior captain at American Airlines. I got just finished captain training in May. And so I've flown with a lot of very junior first officers that are, brand new hired guys. Some of them just finished training. Mm-hmm. And they've been, without a doubt or without exception, they've been very good. They know how to fly the airplane very well. They're very good with procedures. They're very good. They're brand new at it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I don't see a huge difference between them brand new at it and me brand new at it after several years in the military.
Mm-hmm.
I do see a difference between them brand new at it and some of the guys and gals who had that little bit longer, maybe spent 4 or 5 years at the regionals before they came over to a major airline.
Sure.
So the pilot shortage has shortened that chain up where what used to be 5 or 6 years at a regional now sometimes is 2 years, 3 years, because they're just, the job opportunities are there. And if you can make that leap from a regional to a major, almost everyone is going to do that as soon as they can.
The next question I have for you is, have you noticed in your flying, is there an increase in people that are doing this as a second career?
There are a lot more people doing it. What I found is there are a lot of people who travel a path of, maybe they were in the military for 8 or 10 years. Maybe they were an A&P. They were a mechanic in the Navy. And when they got out, they went to flight school. So it's a lot of folks doing what I do. I think the other thing that's happening is that there's a lot of people that are doing aviation, but they're also doing something else. And some of this may be COVID related. I flew with a guy the other day who is a first officer at American Airlines, and during COVID, he just decided to go to law school, became a lawyer.
Interesting.
I don't know what would possess somebody to do that, but I mean, he seems to love it. So he's got works at a law practice doing aviation law. So,
okay. Still aviation related then. Yeah.
There's some overlap there, but I've found a lot of people are doing things in addition to aviation. So it may not necessarily be a second career, but they've got parallel careers.
I suppose with the scheduling, that depending on how you do it, that might be somewhat lucrative for some folks.
It's one of those things, the scheduling, especially if you live in base. So I live in St. Augustine, I'm based in Miami. So I have I spend a part of my off time just getting to work, getting to my job. But if you live in Miami, well, you're going to have something like 12 to 15 days off a month, depending on how senior you are and what equipment you're on and things like that. If you want to start a job, being a realtor or open a carpentry shop and make something, I don't know. There's time to do that.
So what advice would you give someone considering a career change into something aviation related?
So one of the things that that you and I had talked about earlier is the whole finances of it, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
And I'm super fortunate in that my time in the Navy, I built hours. I got a lot of qualifications. I was fortunate enough to fly a couple of airplanes in a King Air. A King Air 200 has a type rating. It has I got my ATP in the plane that the Navy was already paying me to fly.
Yeah.
So a lot of the financial burdens of it, I didn't have to bear. I was, that was, some of that was intentional and some of it was just luck, timing wise. So my advice would be that the long pole in the tent always seems to be how to pay for all this stuff. Mm-hmm. The good news is that right now, all of the major airlines are hurting for pilots. And so they've opened up flight academies and cadet programs and things like that, that especially if you're younger, if you're an 18-year-old who thinks you want to fly airplanes, there are avenues to help. They're not going to pay for all of it, I don't think. I'm not 100% sure how all those programs work, but I know that they make that financial burden much, much more tolerable. That's the thing I think that stops people the most, is that it's super expensive, and it really is. That's the other side of that, is that all of the major airlines have some kind of program to help with that financial burden, because they understand that it takes, depending on where you live and it can take $150,000 to get to your ATP. Yeah. That's a lot of money. There's a bridge for that.
Yeah, it's a good point with all those different programs that are available now. So before we wrap up, is there anything else important that you want to cover that we haven't gone over?
The big thing I would say is that if somebody's looking at this as a first or as a second career, now is the time. Go out, do a discovery flight, see if it's something that you're really interested in, take a couple of lessons and start down that path, because there is a pilot shortage right now and it's significant, but it's not going to last forever. Right. We all look at all of these things going on as, well, it's just going to be on an upward trajectory forever. That's just not the case. It's something could happen. September 11th could happen, God forbid, but that upward trajectory is not indefinite.
Yeah, as they say, this too shall pass. So someone
That's
wants
right.
to do it. That might be the time to do it. Jody, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time and sharing your story.
I appreciate it. I can talk about myself for hours upon end, bore everyone around me for as long as everyone would like.
Well, sure do appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Jody.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Well, I had a lot of fun talking to Jody on this episode. One of the things I wanted to try to convey with this specific episode is we've heard others talk about how they see the path into a commercial aviation career being you either have to know a pilot growing up or you have to go into the military. And while Jody went into the military, it wasn't initially to become a pilot. So I wanted to share a little bit about not just how a military aviator can move into commercial aviation afterwards, but I still felt he had a unique story of being a Navy corpsman first before going into the aviation field. So thanks again, Jody, for sharing that with me. I hope that was beneficial for others who are listening to the podcast. On our next episode, we're going to be bringing on one of those guests who are still mid-transition. So I will be welcoming Layla to the program. She is currently a clinical dietitian. In that career, she has worked with nutrition programs covering almost 1,000 children in many different daycare centers around her state. So as for aviation, growing up, she was actually terrified of airplanes when she was younger. But in 2018, she started flying with her dad, who was himself a rusty pilot, and the rest is history. So we'll talk much more about that on our next episode with Layla. Can't wait to have you on board for that one. And Layla also happens to be another one of those guests who is a part of the Discord community. So after her episode, if you want to talk to her or read about the updates in her journey as she chases her dreams into aviation, you can do that right in the Discord community. So if you are not a member, send me an email at flythetransition@gmail.com and I will get you an invite for that community. And finally, if you like what I'm doing, I would love to hear from you. So you can leave me a rating or review on anywhere you're listening to this podcast, or you can send me an email at flythetransition@gmail.com, and maybe I will even read your review on a future episode. So thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.